and then we're good to go.
All right. The script says good morning. Let me just say morning. Appreciate everybody's patience as we have gone through technical difficulties this morning for about the past hour, actually. This is Jason Orm, Chair of the Oregon Board of Accountancy Laws and Rules Committee. Today is Friday, January 9th, 2026. The time is 11:28 a.m. I'm calling this public meeting of the Laws and Rules Committee to order. This is a hybrid in-person and Zoom meeting that is being recorded and is being held at the offices of the OSCPA on 10206 Southwest Laurel Street in Beaverton, Oregon. We do have a quorum to start this meeting. I don't know if we'll have additional members joining us or not. Beth is experiencing a lack of power in Minnesota, so she will not be joining us. Please be sure to mute your mic when you'd like to speak. Please either raise your hand in the room or on Zoom so I can see it, or use the virtual raise your hand option. Committee members, liaisons, support staff can ask to speak at any time. For members of the public observing, please use the public comment opportunity for any comment you may have, unless specifically called upon. In addition, members of the public are limited to 3 minutes of comment, and the chair reserves the right to terminate comment if the comment does not pertain to the issues the committee is considering. Please do not use the chat room for any discussions. Should any technical issues arise, we will pause the meeting until they are resolved. I'll now take a roll call of members and guests present at the OSCPA offices. Starting to my left are
Sherry McPherson in person.
Jason Orm, Chair.
Martin Petioni, Executive Director.
And now on Zoom, starting with Amanda.
Amanda Fells, committee member.
Melissa.
Melissa Wall, committee member.
Ray.
Ray Johnson, committee member.
And John.
John Howell, guest.
Thank you. I see no one else on video. I assume that if there's anybody else in that has not stated their name, I'll give a moment for that. Hearing none. So has everyone had an opportunity to review the agenda for today's meeting?
Andrew Barlow, board staff attending by Zoom.
Oh, there we go. Andrew Barlow. Anybody with you, Andrew, at the board office?
No, sorry, I thought we were doing board staff, and so I missed that.
Well, I skipped over you because I can't see you on screen to remind me. My apologies.
No worries. Thank you.
All right. So we have the agenda. Everyone's had an opportunity to review it, I'm assuming. Are there any discussion, any modifications to the agenda?
5A, we're not ready for that item yet. For those of you that are fully on top of reviewing your LRC materials, you've probably figured side problems. Will not have any items. Was able to send out under item 5A the first draft of the legislative concept, so I would respectfully ask for deferral. And I can discuss it a little bit more later, but for this meeting, we will not have a text to review on the draft.
Martin, what I would like to do is, yes, I have a couple of comments myself on that. Can we just use that 5A time for comments?
Yeah.
And then move on to the other items.
Perfect.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Other comments? Hearing none, I'll accept a motion to accept the agenda as modified.
So moved. Melissa Wall.
So moved, Melissa Wall, seconded.
McPherson.
Second.
Sherry McPherson, second. She beat you, Ray.
Sorry, Ray.
And so on the vote, as we did on moving, please state your full name. So Sherry?
Carrie McPherson. Aye.
Jason Orm, I. Amanda,
Amanda Fells, I.
Melissa,
Melissa Wall, I.
Ray.
Ray Johnson, aye.
Motion passes. Public comment. John, any comment?
Yeah, I guess this is where I get to not keep my teeth together. I just, as this committee moves forward to consider the alternative practice structures, I just wanted to share my own concerns as a member of the public and as a CPA. We were approached by a group a couple of years ago that is one of these private equity practice structures that is rolling up small firms. Everything on the tax side seemed fine. I mean, understand how all that works. So we get over to the A&A side, go, well, what do you guys do, with your A&A practice? Because we have an A&A practice. Well, that became murky. And checked NASBA. The firm wasn't in the peer review program. And I was kind of really scratching my head about that. And then finally we queried them again and they go, well, what we do is we leave the legacy entities that we've rolled up out there as the peer review entity. And I'm like, okay, that seems interesting. And then we have at least one shareholder registered with the respective state board of accountancy to keep that entity alive, so to speak. I go, okay, so none of the other partners are listed with their respective board of accountancy as being part of this legacy firm that's performing the actual attest service under their name. And they're like, nope. I go, none of the managers and none of the staff. And they're like, nope. I'm like, And I told my business partner at the time, I said, I have a lot of indigestion with that. I said, I've been around the board and I've served on committees and I know what peer review is supposed to accomplish. And I know what the public trust is supposed to be in CPAs. And I go, I'm not doing that. I go, you want to do it? I'm retiring soon enough. You can go for it. What has happened in that period of time is there's been a lot of roll-up activity here in Oregon. There's been a lot of firms that have been rolled up, and I don't need to go through it and name names or anything, but I've noticed that this pattern has now been repeated. There's actually a firm that's been around for a very long time, does a lot of municipal audits, and supposedly thousands of hours of municipal audits. They have one person registered with the board under the name of that firm. So what does this mean? We always want to know when something doesn't work in audit and attest as who is responsible and who accepts responsibility, right? Whether anyone performs audit and attest, we want someone, a CPA, to accept responsibility. And that would be my concern. With what I see with the form of practice. That was really all I had to say on the topic, but I did want to say that.
John, thank you for your comments and your expression of concern. Very much appreciated. This is a evolving, swirling, difficult, complex topic. And I appreciate very much what you've shared with us. Thank you. So I'm looking at council for a minute. Yep, follow up.
I feel like this is a little different though, in the respect of like what we've seen so far has been like where it's tax only, but you're saying this is a test. Right? Am I missing?
No, you're not missing something. Well, I mean, you are and you aren't, right? I think what John is describing, and John, please correct me, I want to put words in your mouth, right? What we've seen so far at the board, on the board side and in the general descriptions is that the personnel is either held.
I'm sorry, Martin, your mic is cutting out again. We're only getting about maybe every third to fifth word.
I think you might have to just go closer. I think it's just too far when you're at the.
Oh, it's too far.
You just need to be closer.
Here. In fact, you just scooch this way, Martin, and use mine. That way your laptop will scooch too.
Okay. Thank you. So, so first of all, I'll do an audio test before I talk. Can folks hear me? Okay. So I think what the issue here is that council is trying to raise, and John, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so please quality check me here, right? I think the issue is that we've seen several versions of what these APSPE structures can look like, and it either means at minimum two entities where the entity on the attest side retains essentially basically no personnel except for one, and either the tax entity holds all the personnel and leases back to the tax and consulting entity leases back staff as work gets done over on the other side, over on the attest side, or they set up a third entity where essentially both the attest side that is registered with the board, as well as the tax and consulting entity that is PE owned, do not have their own staff, but essentially use a third entity that purely is there to hold the personnel. It's literally just holds the personnel and has that personnel leased back as work demands to work on the PE owned and non-board registered tax and consulting entity, and leases the same staff as necessary over to the other board registered ANA entity, which basically explains, I think, what John is trying to point out, which is the fact that on the attest side, which is what we're trying to focus on here from the peer review perspective, from the peer review side, is that there really isn't a set of staff that is regularly there. There's essentially one person that gets assigned to be registered with the board, right? That is, and I think that's the core problem that I think John was trying to point out, but I'm going to look for a little bit of validation that my understanding as a non-expert on this kind of conforms with what he was trying to suggest.
Yeah, no, thank you, Martin. You've explained it perfectly. That is precisely the issue.
And John, I don't know which firm you're talking about, and that's not appropriate to ask in a public meeting or maybe period. But I noticed something similar on perhaps the firm that you're talking about and scratched my head and thought, how are they doing municipal audits with one CPA?
Yes, sir.
I don't understand how that works. And there is only one CPA listed under the firm.
Yeah. And I think probably the further concern there is that the peer review standards don't really have a lot in them that talks about looking through entity form relationships to leased employees and who are these employees. The peer review standards talk a lot about lines of communication and lines of authority within the firm, and how information is communicated by staff and how staff communicate upwards to management concerns that they find on engagement, and how management communicates downward, the tone at the top, the ethical standards, the technical standards, and so on and so forth. So I wonder, I guess my long-term concern is it seems to be to me that there almost ought to be another module, if you would, of a peer review engagement where if they have an alternative practice forum, they have to address how those matters are handled in an environment like that. They could be handled very well. The public trust could be met, professional standards could be met, but from the outside looking in, we don't really see how. And I think that the peer reviewers need to have some guidance on that.
Okay, thank you. Martin, any additional comments from your side or questions?
I think the only other comment that I would make on this, and I really appreciate John bringing this issue up so clearly, is that what is on my radar here is the other publicly known piece, that I believe connects to this issue, or at least should connect to this issue, and hopefully is already connected to the issue raised by John, which is that at the AICPA the national level, the AICPA National Peer Review Committee, the peer review board, is, essentially proposing changes that I do not believe, unless Sherry tells me otherwise, are finalized at this point, right? That essentially has proposed that firms that are subject to peer review and are part of an APS-PE structure, that essentially there's a proposal out there to remove those firms from the peer review process in the administrative entities and have those peer reviews performed exclusively through the directly AICPA run national, I think it's called National Peer Review Committee. And my hope is, kind of putting on my eternal optimist hat on, that would connect to John's issue in a sense that maybe that in part would enable that committee to be more focused on and fine-tuned on being able to respond to how these structures could possibly can operate well in a peer review context, including with the personnel issue that John just raised of essentially putting it as neutrally as possible, using primarily leased personnel that is not a permanent part of the attest entity to perform the work. So I don't know whether whether there is a connection, but I would hope that there is a connection to that issue, and I'm sure that there will be follow-up conversations around that piece, and that's not meant as either endorsement or opposition to that idea, because the board itself has not taken any kind of a position on that proposal impacting peer review.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? John, thank you for bringing that up. I saw what I said I saw, and as soon as I started listening to you, it gave more insight into this issue. So thank you very much. Next, I don't think we've got any other members of the public. John, if you want to hang out with us, we are happy to have you as long as you want to hang out with us. We will be digging into this more, and if you have comment, would be happy to hear from you. But I also understand if you want to clench your teeth again like a good Norwegian and all right. So update on Senate Bill 797 rules that went public, what, a week ago? No, Monday, didn't they?
Yes, so the statute took effect on January 1, which was actually, I think, a Thursday. And then even though we were excited, we didn't make our staff come to work on January 1. So on January 2, we sent out a whole bunch of notifications around, the rules that had been exposed and just published at the Secretary of State. They are now open for comment. Just to be really clear, and want to put this on the record to protect all of us, we cannot, under any circumstances at this meeting, have any substantive discussions around these rules, because we are now in the formal comment process. So this is purely a procedural update, and that's simply, it's done that way when agencies promulgate rules to make sure that there is an even playing field in terms of everybody has exactly the same opportunity to comment on rules. So for example, with a member of the public present, John, here, as much as we love him, I would have to politely decline any comments he may have on those rules, because we have to kind of put it on an even playing field. That said, process-wise, everything is working great. We have stuff posted on the board website. We've got social media attention. We're going to do some more of that. And quite frankly, as so often happens with these rules, what I can talk about, since it's about process, not substance, right? We get a very healthy mix of responses back that are, quite frankly, much more often not a comment on the rule, but really questions about how does this impact me, right? It's not a suggestion of, I wish you had done this differently. That needs to go into the comment record, or I wish you would tweak this, or here's a wrong reference, right? But it's more about trying to understand if those rules were adopted, what it means for their practice. There's a lot of that feedback. Quite a bit of that feedback is positive. There is more feedback so far that I can say that I can simply say that is really about there's a great deal of interest in general around how the exposed rules improve the ability of public accounting firms to hire staff. So these changes that we've made that are not about the licensing pathways, but around retired status and inactive status are getting a lot of attention from firms in terms of do's and don'ts. But again, most of it is not in the form of what I would classify as comment on the rule, but more like, okay, if this gets adopted, can I do X, right? Type questions. And so that's really healthy. That's good news. And I think the committee has a lot to be very, very proud of there. And I think that's as far as I can go without getting into any substance on this stuff. We have a rulemaking hearing scheduled on the 29th at our board meeting. And the goal is to try to get through the written comment record and any oral comments we get at that board meeting. And essentially, I've had, and I hope it's okay that I do this publicly. I'm going to put Shelley on the spot a little bit. I've had some informal discussions with Shelley about if the plan holds that the board adopts these rules either as exposed or very close to as exposed on the 29th with an effective date of Sunday, February 1, we intend to have a party in the office. And by party, I don't mean where nothing gets done. By party in the sense of literally processing applications for licensure like crazy on Monday, February 2nd, and get as many out the door as possible, and maybe even do a little bit of a kind of in a party atmosphere, if you will, and maybe even do a little bit of a, press release saying, hey, we have the first, whatever, 10 people under the new pathway getting licensed on the first day the staff came in after the rules are in effect, and kind of celebrate the moment a little bit. So that's kind of where we are. So we'll keep you posted, and we'll maybe share that a little bit to the extent we can without getting into inappropriate public communications. But we'll share some of that out, and I think committee should be very excited about that.
Thank you, Martin. That'll be exciting. Send the group how many were, send something out to us saying, yes, we just licensed this many under the new.
Yep.
Yeah, just for curiosity.
Yes.
Session too. We were saying that's a poignant day.
Yeah.
That Monday
it
the
is.
2nd.
It is. All right. Thank you. So now moving into item 5, which is to call it a difficult topic, I think is an understatement. To call it a complex topic, I think is also an understatement. So we're going to start into this, and I would like to just make a couple of comments under 5A, and Martin have you make your comments. Yep. And the reason being, I think we have the NASBA documents, the ACPA documents to go through, but there's context, I think, that I've just received that will help us. I appreciated what John, who's now dropped off, presented to us, because that's Melissa shaking your head. He's not dropped off.
Correct. He's with Andrew with no video feed, but
Okay.
so maybe
Oh, there he
you
is.
can't see him.
Okay, there he is. I couldn't see him on the participant list. John, sorry. Glad to still have you with us. But I want to frame this and then decide how we want to move through the white papers. Ray's done a great job on going through and giving us an outline. Thank you. From a tax guy to somebody who has expertise in this area that I certainly don't. Thank you. I'll find a convenient spot for a break to grab lunch. I'll just find a spot and we'll go from there. So, Melissa, hand up.
Hi. I just wanted to share in the spirit of full transparency, if people have not seen the announcement, which came out on Wednesday, that two firms in Lake Oswego sold to a national firm.
They are now part of Aprio.
Correct.
We are part of the Aprio Alliance. So yeah, two firms, 187 staff total, 24 partners, as I recall. The other firm involved is Hoffman, Stewart, and Schmidt. And you still have DeLapp. I was wondering if you were going to have Aprio up there, Melissa.
We get new computers and stuff on Monday, so I believe that everything will kind of at that point.
Okay. Congratulations. So,
Thank you.
Martin, do you want to start? And we're getting feedback. As in Mike feedback, not people feedback. Okay. Oh, that is better. Ray?
Yeah, I guess I want to say, while I drafted comments, I've got no real pride of authorship here. So if people have comments, they're very welcome. I just wanted to get something on paper that we could respond to. I figured it's better than starting with a blank piece of paper, but feel free to engage the topic, and I welcome any comments that you may have as we go forward and discuss the white paper.
Thank you, Ray. It is much better than a blank piece of white paper or colored paper for me. Very much. So, Martin, do you want to make your comments? Do you want me to start under the legislative piece?
Right at the Ray draft piece, we're still under 5A. I just wanted to make sure that I have clarity on that. So on the legislative piece, all I simply wanted to convey is that at the board meeting on December 1, we did have a very strong kind of re-endorsement, if you will, by the board of what the board and I think the LRC originally discussed back in September in some detail, which is essentially the policy outline of crafting a narrow legislative concept for an emphasis on narrow for the 2027 session that would essentially ensure that if an existing CPA firm undergoes an APS-PE ownership change, that the board would be able to maintain authority to still regulate the subsequently emerging entities, including the entity that would be PE owned on the tax and consulting side. And essentially give us the authority to have a quasi-firm licensure type for a firm that is not majority owned by CPAs for that entity in order to kind of maintain what the board essentially feels pretty strongly about, which is essentially having consistency across the board about how we regulate firms and maintain essentially the same level of authority that we've had in Oregon for decades, and find a way to maintain that even with the APS PE environment. That is, as narrow as that may sound, it's a thin needle to thread, and so we're waiting with bated breath on what legally, hopefully as a standalone, relative, concise legislative concept that does not open up multiple sections of our statutes, board council can come up with and have at least an initial discussion with the board on language about on the 29th of January. Depending on how that goes, what I would hope, Mr. Chair and committee members, is that we essentially, since we don't have the language today, that we simply pivot it around and say, let's have the board discuss it initially. And I'm pretty sure it will still have to go back to this committee, right, for further vetting and further drafting and so on. We have until realistically, ideal would be for us to be able to finish the drafting process by the June 4 board meeting. That would be ideal. And by finishing, meaning getting something off into legislative council with board endorsement. Otherwise, that timeline can slip. We can technically wait until September of this year to get something into Leg Council. I don't necessarily recommend that with something this complex. But that's essentially what I wanted to point out, both in terms of where the board is at and around process and timelines. I also want to just emphasize that we had a very honest discussion at the board level about the fact that at this point, we are still much more likely than not to be the only jurisdiction in the country that is trying to essentially maintain some level of jurisdiction over the specifically PE-owned portion of the, if you will, non-ANA tax consulting enterprise that emerges out of these structures. So we're a bit of an outlier right now. It doesn't mean that others aren't interested in watching what we're doing, and I don't mean that negatively at all by any stretch of the imagination. But that's kind of where we are. So I'll leave it at that for right now. I hope that helps, Mr. Chair.
It does. Thank you. And I will add on to that. Our firm attended an ethics course taught by Mark Hughes, who is a Washington CPA, taught for the OSCPA for years on ethics, and a standard 4-hour ethics course. He complimented Oregon a couple of times with what we are doing and that we are out front. Mark was on the Oregon or the Washington Board of Accountancy for 8 years, 2 of them as chair. And he talked a little bit about the difference between Oregon and Washington rules. And I had the thought to email him and say, can we just have a 10-minute conversation? I'd just like some history. And he said, sure, happy to. He is not on the board. He does not speak for the board, but he gave me history. Washington, we regulate firms that do non-attest work. So if I'm in a firm with my 2 other tax partners and all we do is tax work, we register with the Board of Accountancy in Oregon. We would not in Washington. That rule change, as I understand it from Mark and the documents he sent me, happened in 2019. And part of the reason for that change in Washington appears based upon the summary of committee testimony to the House and Senate committees of Washington, was as a convenience for smaller firms. So if they were just a tax firm, they didn't have to register with the Board of Accountancy. It was a convenience. And I said, so what happens to the records? Who owns the records? And there was a pause there, and he said, well, we have different rules there too. We don't have the record retention rules that Oregon does. So he didn't have a lot of answer there. And he said, again, I do not speak for the board. He said, there is some concern given where we are now versus where we were when this decision was made in 2019 about consumer protection, given the new fact pattern and given the new landscape. He didn't say that their board was looking at it because he can't speak for the board or anything else, but he said in discussions he's having with people, there is a concern that is similar to the concern we're having of consumer protection. So that was just interesting coming from Washington, our neighbor to the north, about what they did to remove the registration requirement, why they did it, and now wondering with the change in landscape, what they might need to do. So I lay that out there because that goes into the discussion we're about to have as we move to 5B and C. Mark also mentioned something else. He's been to the NASBA meetings. Was on AICPA Council as I am now. And Sherry attends those meetings. And he said the national groups are focused much more on independence issues rather than consumer protection. And he said that's why you see what you're seeing with the exposure drafts and that sort of thing coming out of the national organizations. Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. But there's not the same kind of guidance yet. I don't know if it's on the docket or not, to address things like, and I'm talking because I'm a tax guy, me and my 3 partners just setting up a tax firm and not needing to be registered with the board. And is that okay? And we are outliers. So that sets the table for where we're going. I wanted to put that piece of Washington color in just so we have it. Their rules are different, but that's Washington color. Amanda has her colored hand up, and so she has some local color to add as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, one other thing to kind of remember about the primary difference between Washington and Oregon, right, is the fact that Washington doesn't have a state income tax. So when it comes, we have excise tax, but we don't have income tax. So we don't have any licensing requirement at all when it comes to income taxes because it is all just federal. So anyone with a PTIN is allowed to prepare and file a tax return in the state of Washington. So it's not unusual that CPA firms would not have to register with the board because there is no other standard in Washington state for tax preparation at all, other than IRS compliance. So.
Thank you for that comment, Amanda, very much. And that's true. That is a difference. I know somebody who came out of a company that we did work for that was sold. He's a controller. He's not a CPA. He's not a tax. He's okay at tax. Set up his own office and hung a shingle in Washington and started preparing tax returns. Just also as color, Mark in his presentation mentioned that there are about 1 million to 1.1 million tax preparers in the country. That's how many P10s are out there. About 10% of those are CPAs. Another small percentage are enrolled agents. The vast majority of that million are unregulated. And I don't think about that because I'm regulated. But that's why the IRS has some of the concerns that it does about that we've seen over the past 10, 12 years. So thank you, Amanda. There are some differences. There just are. With that, I would like to move us to 5B, I did not ask Ray ahead of time to do this, but logically to me, it would seem appropriate to ask you, if you would, good sir, to lead us through your notes, your thoughts and comments as we go through each of the items on your checklist, and just use that as the basis for this discussion. Are you comfortable with that, Ray?
Sure, I can do that. The comments are broken into three pieces, as is the white paper. Independence and professional standards, disclosure and public understanding, and regulatory oversight and enforcement. And I'll take it one at a time. And I have to admit that, Jonathan, your comment today was enlightening and significantly enlightening. As I read this first question, how should attest firms operating in an APS structure with PE maintain quality control and avoid undue influence and pressure to perform if the non-attest influence the attest entities' management, compensation, and performance evaluations? And clearly, I think if there's only one person in the attest firm and everybody else is leased from the non-attest firm, and the non-attest firm has control over the firm's management, particularly compensation and performance evaluation, they're significant threats to the firm's independence and ability to act with integrity and objectivity. And I don't know that I'd really written that into the comment that I have. The comment, my initial reaction was the majority-owned CPAs need to have real control over quality control, performance evaluation, partner employee compensation. But if you've got only one employee there and everybody else is a leased employee, I think that raises very serious concerns. And I think we should express that raises very serious concerns. Because you don't really, at the end of the day, you don't have a majority CPA management. I mean, you've got one employee in the attest firm leasing from everybody else. It's not like you have a majority-owned CPAs in that entity. So it remains to be seen if you really have effective majority ownership with control of the attest side. So, my initial reaction was the attest firm CPAs need to be in control of all day-to-day decisions. I still believe that that the majority of CPAs, not just the single partner, but I think this raises serious concerns about the underlying quality of audit, and there are serious risks associated with the firm's integrity, objectivity, and independence. And I might even write it a little stronger than I've written it at this point. I welcome every other people's comments.
Hey, Ray, if I may, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
How would you used the term, CPAs that are essentially that are doing the work, the owners, right? If there is only a single person assigned to the entity that is essentially different from those that are performing the work, how do you know which of these employees actually are the ones that you are trying to capture if they're not in the entity and you don't know necessarily who's assigned to what engagement for any period of time? Like I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we define even, right? Who is, what is that group that we're trying to capture? Because I don't live this stuff day to day at all, right? But I'm trying to understand how, if for assignment, audit A in a hypothetical APSPE firm, you have, 10 folks assigned to it, and I'm not even sure that those 10 folks would be the same from beginning to the end. And then you have another engagement on the attest side, same firm, but you may have 10 different people assigned to that engagement. So how do we do that? How do we define what we're after in here?
Well, it raises a very interesting question to me, and I'm speaking a little bit off the top of my head. And Jonathan, if you're in the background, I'll welcome your input here. But people regularly rotate, particularly staff people will rotate in and out. You probably have some continuity of management and partners with the client. But I think you have real significant risks if the attest side's management compensation and performance evaluations are all done, or if there's significant influence or input to that from non-CPAs. And the CPAs who work on the clients, the compensation of the CPAs who work on the clients, and the quality control, how you communicate up and down the line, tone at the top, and listen to people about their concerns as they do an audit. And as we go more and more into using AI and other key tools, that people not subordinate their judgment to these tools. Those types of quality controls and kind of the tone at the top about quality controls of doing the audit need to be controlled by CPAs. Full stop. And how the firm creates that quality control structure when you technically have only one CPA in the entity is a huge question. I mean, I think the part of what we're seeing is a question of form over substance. And at the end of the day, the substance of the quality control structure and how that's managed, and managed by majority CPAs, not managed by non-majority CPAs, is a critical issue.
Well, and I think
so. I think I would probably, in light of the conversation that we've had today, I'd probably still be expressing the same issues, but I'd probably characterize it that we have a bigger challenge than ever before, because the CPAs that are supposed to be responsible for this work are not in the CPA, not in the attest firm.
Amanda?
And I think we want to express our concern over that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean, I agree with everything that you said here, Ray, as far as the substance of what was there, but like taking it to that next step, like you were just talking about, I can't figure out how we can protect the CPA's ability to use their unbiased professional judgment under this compensation structure. I mean, I don't know how we would do it. And so hopefully people smarter than me can figure that out, but there's definitely an inherent conflict of interest there.
Melissa, I'm going to put you on the spot. And Melissa, after all this time, I can't remember. Are you tax or audit?
I'm gratefully tax.
Oh, a fellow tax person. I'm still going to put you on the spot, even though you're a fellow tax geek. What do you think? Because you and I look at the world differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that the points that have been made are very good points, and definitely things to be concerned about. I think that as I process some of the discussion, it is the idea of the overall idea of more regulation or less regulation. I'm generally a less regulation type of person, but that depends on people doing the right thing. And as Amanda just pointed out, when compensation is involved, then the right thing maybe can be weighed in ways that perhaps it isn't when compensation is not involved. Some of the concerns that have been raised, I think, in my exposure to these structures in the past 6 months or so, have been taken care of in various ways that things are done. For instance, the percentage of the overall firm that is owned by a PE structure. If the CPAs have a majority ownership of the firm, then I think a lot of these questions kind of go away. And I think that there are very many questions that are not apparent to those of us who are not sitting in this structure, and thinking about all the specific situations that come up, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, as a quick follow-up. So, I mean, I think we're focusing a lot on the ownership part of it, right? And when we're talking about, when we're talking about majority owned by CPAs, I mean, in all of these examples, I guess we have to talk about where the actual funds are coming from and what percentage the non-attest firm actually owns of the attest firm. But I mean, with one CPA on the board, I mean, are they saying that then that firm is 100% owned by CPAs in that case? In which case they just don't have any staff and they're using all leased staff. So, I mean, I wonder if disconnecting the actual ownership of the firm from the people that are actually doing the work and performing the services might provide a little bit of a solution.
And I might, I don't know if it's the attest firm versus the non-attest firm. It's really, in some respects, the non-CPA influence over the CPA's performing audits. I think that's the way I would probably tend to answer this particular question.
Well, and I think that we now have 2 public companies in the nation.
Who's the second one, Melissa? Anderson. The old Anderson is one. Who's the second?
CBiz?
Oh, CBiz, that's right. That's right.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And, they're answering to shareholders, which means they're answering to people who are looking for increases in stock value, and so there are very many motivations that are out there. I think that, at the end of the day, we're asked to do almost an impossible job, which is uh, helping to police people whose conscience is not strong enough over their desire for additional compensation, I suppose, is the gaudiest way to put it.
Sherry, thoughts?
I have any separate from what you're saying. I'm just taking it in and in agreement with so many of the points that have been mentioned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. And I have some of those same concerns, and the AICPA peak document talks a little bit about this. If we set up a firm and the CPAs in the room are all partners, and Sherry and Martin come to us and say, hey, we got a deal for you guys. We'll loan you $10 million to help with firm expansion. Loan, flat out loan. Do they have some influence on all of us? I think so. Because if they pull that loan, if they're uncomfortable and covenants are written such and they pull that loan, it leaves us in a bad spot. I share the concerns. I share the concerns that have been raised, and what I scrawled down as a note. Let's approach this differently. Is there a different way this could be structured where we would be more comfortable? Because what I'm hearing the group say is when we have out non-CPAs with some sort of influence, and money is influence, or management control, even without ownership, is influence, it could encourage people to lose their objectivity and make poor choices. Is there a way around that? Melissa, you inhaled.
So if our primary method for towing the line about quality audits is to do peer review, and our main concern is that, or one of our main concerns is that we have less CPAs who are potentially in these entities. Maybe we change the rules about peer review, which I think is something that maybe Jonathan brought up at the beginning. And there, the question is, how much do we want to change it? If we say that everybody that signs an assurance report or any sort of accounting report as a CPA under a particular firm name has to be subject to random peer review, within the firm structure, right? But there's some sort of additional procedures that are attached to the person versus the firm. And so if somebody has signing ability on a given engagement, then they need to be part of that pool.
So is that a little bit like, I think, remember Megan Hartley, now on the board, was with us on this committee. I think Megan signs her name on public audit reports, doesn't she? I turned to Ray for that. I'm way outside my wheelhouse, but her personal name's associated with those reports, isn't it?
On public companies, I think the answer is yes. I'm not, but in general, when we're talking about municipal audits and a lot of other audits that the public truly cares about is the firm name.
Right.
But we,
And when the firm signs it, you know, once upon a time, we understood who that firm was. Right? And I think some of us who've been around for a long time remember when the wheels came off that caused us to create the Public Companies Accounting Oversight Board, because the consulting side of the firm was wagging the tail of the audit side of the firm. You know, and we were cutting corners on the audit to get the consulting business. And I think those risks to integrity and objectivity are the same risks that we're talking about today.
And given that, and what we've learned from history, what guardrails do we put? What are the guardrails? I'm asking a real question, but I know the answer is very difficult. But is there something we can learn from that history as we try to navigate this? Because what I'm hearing is doing nothing doesn't make sense, especially with what Jonathan shared with us, or John shared with us this morning.
Yeah, and so the question is, how do we retain the management of quality control, performance evaluations, partner and employee compensation decisions solely made by CPAs?
So
and CPAs with understanding of the attest side of the firm and the obligations of the attest side of the firm.
So what I'd like to do, and I'm just watching the clock, Ray just posed a great question. Why don't we break for 10 minutes, grab food for those who are in the time zone where food is appropriate? I think everybody is.
Okay.
And have a chance to step off and do what they need to. And let's come back at 12:40 and talk about that, because part of this to me is getting down to how it's disturbing. What's happening is disturbing. I'm not quite sure what to do about it, because there's a part of me that we're not driving the bus on this one. Somebody else is. We're driving the bus from a regulatory standpoint, but what do we do? So let's break.
Yeah.
Back in 10 minutes. Sherry, would you mind cutting the recording off while we're gone? And we'll be back at 12:20 Pacific. Welcome back. I gave everybody an extra 6 minutes. We were having an interesting conversation here that you may have been able to get parts of. Just as we finished and clicked to the break, Martin had a very interesting thought about this whole, are we looking at this the right direction? And I'm going to let him give his thought. And I'm also going to move the mouse because it's okay. Melissa, you have a hand to you just above your head. And it's you can't see it, but
All right. Well, thanks, Jason. So I think what Jason asked me to kind of just share with the group is that kind of my stream of consciousness is I'm kind of like intently listening to discussion we just had amongst the group around, hey, it's really, kind of this whole realization, what are the implications of the fact that essentially these board registered attest entities are essentially hollowed out from staff by staff, right? From staff, have only one person assigned to them and the implications. And then I connected it back to, well, wait a minute. Doesn't that mean if you connect the dots to our potential legislative concept, right? Doesn't that actually improve our case that you really need to continue to regulate the entity that actually holds the staff that is essentially, by their very own admission of these structures, contains the staff that are actually doing the attest work? Right? Because essentially under that description is that staff, even though it's not sitting in the attest entity, is the one that gets leased over to the attest entity to do the work. So then doesn't that actually, since we are historically from day one of this profession primarily supposed to regulate the attest side of the equation, doesn't that actually improve our case that we should continue to regulate as opposed to step back from that at a firm level, since that's where the staff is, at least in most cases? I need to still put in the asterisk that I put in earlier, which is that there are APS-PE structures that are not all the same, and there are some that actually have all the personnel in a separate structure that literally holds only the personnel. It's literally strictly a leasing entity for personnel, and both there are
Right.
ESPE versions where the tax and consulting entity are also technically have no staff, right? Because there is a third entity that only does the personnel side and the leasing to those entities. That gets a little bit more complex. I don't see that quite as often, right? But I did just want to throw out the point that, in my view, what I just heard, I think it helps our case.
I totally agree, Martin.
Would there be a difference between policing an entity that is not doing assurance work versus policing the actual practitioners doing the assurance work?
I think there's a point with the entity itself where you think about the entity, its incentives, its quality control structure, that you care about the decisions about quality control that are made by the entity itself. So I think the entity that provides the assurance services is as important as the individuals.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's because, I mean, otherwise, how do you assess that intangible influence that's paid? That's placed upon the auditors by the financial backers and the other things without being able to police the firm itself.
Could I actually ask both Amanda and Ray to dig a little deeper on this? And the reason why is that when I have these conversations with my colleagues in these conferences, one of the most common refrains that I hear is, you don't have anything to worry about because we still regulate the individuals. We don't need to regulate at the firm level, is an extremely common answer that I get. And what I think I just heard is, from both Amanda and from Ray, is essentially an argument saying, in this particular context, in that particular space, that's not really true, that the firm level regulation matters. And what I would love some help with is, both from Ray and from you, Amanda, is help me hear from the CPA side the why. Why does the firm level matter? Because there is a ton of pushback on that issue in the discussion forums that I'm in.
I could say the AICPA has already given us that answer in the basic COSO framework, because the COSO framework starts with tone at the top as being one of the things that you have to assess when you're doing any type of an audit. of any type of client. And so you look at the management structure, the control, the influence, and how what role that might play on the systems that are within the organization. And so I think if you just go back to the COSO framework, it kind of gives us a really good argument for that. Exactly. Right? Thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's an environment that the firm creates around quality control. Quality control is not an individual function. Quality control is a firm function. And that's what makes the attest firm important. Going back to my time when I was on the Board of Accountancy, there were several times that we had audit issues come up, and we sanctioned both the individual and the firm. And I think we want to have that ability to talk about the firm's quality control. And quality control isn't just an individual's personal ethics or an individual's compliance with the AICPA or a state's code of ethics. Quality control is, from the top down at the firm. And this is why peer review is important. Peer review is a firm structure, not an individual structure. And I think on the attest side, we care deeply about quality control. And I'd go further to say, I think because I'm concerned that any involvement of the minute you say you're involved with PE, then that goes to separate quality control, separate side of peer review, as opposed to the administrative entities. I think we're going to see more and more pervasive influence of private equity coming into many firms that are doing municipal audits. I think we have to be able to educate the administrative entities on how to evaluate independence, integrity, and quality control. I'd hate to see that centralized and not, if it means we have a big educational effort to get all the peer reviewers up to speed, then that's what we have to do.
Question.
Yeah, I mean, because part of doing an audit too, right? I mean, part of that quality control is the availability of resources, whether that be people, whether that be time, whether that be research, whether that be experts. So to try and say you can do a peer review of a firm that signs a report but doesn't control the resources available for generating that report, I don't think you can do it.
So let me go one step farther down this road.
It's a really interesting point.
So back to Jason's got a firm. Jason's the only partner in the firm, and we're doing financial statements, audited financial statements, which Jason would never do because that's not my area. And I lease all my employees from somebody offshore. They're not CPAs in the United States. Or I lease all my employees from an employee leasing company. I'm going to the extreme here for a reason. What I'm hearing is, okay, we have an argument that we ought to take this leasing entity, this tax consulting entity that's leasing the employees, and we should have jurisdiction over them and quality control, et cetera, as well as the firm signing the report. So Melissa's shaking her head no.
Well, and Jason, I think that the primary difference to would be, in your example, you're still controlling the firm. You're still responsible for that system of control, for the resources, for signing that report, for all of those things. You're still making the decision about your staff, and have control over that overall system. Whereas in this other scenario, that's not necessarily the case.
Right, because I've got somebody who's invested a whole bunch of money who has influence over me. Got it. Thank you for that differentiation. That helps me. Melissa, you also shook your head no at me. So
I don't think I can advocate for us expanding into the non-assurance firm. I think that I think that what we could do is say that the people who are doing the assurance work need to be pulled in to that firm for peer review, which is what I was suggesting earlier. People who are authorizing signing reports for the assurance firm, those people should be under peer review as the insurance firm is under peer review.
okay, so you're taking a little bit different approach than what I'm hearing. So we have the approach that we started with as we came back from break of, all the assurance people are in an entity that we currently are not regulating. Doesn't that give us reason to regulate that firm? Good discussion around that. Melissa, you're pulling that back to a different perspective and saying, okay, really, isn't it the people? And we just pull the people who are not employees of Jason's firm into Jason's firm for purposes of peer review.
Correct. And if those,
For purposes of peer review, but if we have a complaint over a poorly done audit or an audit that didn't find fraud or an audit that an audit that both issued the wrong opinion and there's a public interest in the entity and the wheels have come off, is there an obligation of the firm that signed or is the firm that signed just a shell company? And I think we want to ensure that the firm that signed is a firm not in name only, but there's some substance to what that firm does and its employees do in terms of quality control in the audit. So they're subject to peer review, but that firm would also be subject to regulation of the board.
Well, and so Melissa,
the assurance firm would be subject to regulation of the board, correct?
Right. Now,
So
the question is, who's in that firm? What's the substance of that firm when those employees are really not in that firm, they're in another firm and being leased? It creates some interesting challenge with respect to substance over form.
So since peer review currently doesn't look at individuals, it looks at the system and the quality that the firm does.
Right.
So Melissa, you're thinking that if we bring in that individual accountability to say essentially any licensed person who's touching an audit can be held individually responsible and their work and their quality can be brought into play when it comes to any shortcomings within that work? Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Well, our regulatory process through peer review helps people to understand where they need to improve their quality control. If firms have people who are authorizing the signature of reports, those are senior managers, partner level people, director level people. Those people are responsible for the quality of what they're signing out the door, whether they're leased or not.
Right.
I don't think we want to get into a situation where we're trying to put regulation on these firms that are probably majority not CPA work. And I think part of that comes back to what I have to pull up my notes here, what Martin was saying initially, that considering legislation for 2027, that if this is done, Oregon would most likely be the only state that's trying to have oversight over non-assurance PE practices. So I think that I think that my 30,000 foot summary of what we've been discussing is that regulation of the assurance entity is not enough because it's just one person. So I think that we have to expand that. And the question is, how do we expand that in a way that doesn't set Oregon at odds with the rest of the nation? And I think that if we say, if you're having people sign reports in the assurance entity and sign off and approve that the firm can sign these reports, and they're not employees of the entity, then they also need to be, they're also subject to peer review.
The person authorizing
And they're
the
subject to
signature
the
or
firm's
the
quality
employees who
control
sign.
processes.
Yep.
Okay. Because currently with a non-public audit, it's just signed by the firm. You're not signing as an individual, so you're signing under the firm license currently. So and if you have one CPA who's in charge of the attest firm, they're the one that's they may have delegated the ability for other people to sign on behalf of the firm. They may approve the release of all of these reports. So are you saying then that just that one CPA would also, who gave that approval, would be held accountable, or also those who received the delegated authority?
I think it's the people who are authorizing the report. If you have one person authorizing all the reports, there's no way that they can do that, assuming that they have more than, I don't know how many reports.
Yeah.
So we need to, in other words, people need to be accountable. CPAs need to be accountable for the work that they're signing off on.
Let me come back to, there's a series of questions, of core questions that are in the white paper. And one of those questions is, are there adequate safeguards that the attest firm maintains the necessary internal knowledge and frameworks for compliance with the AICPA code, federal rules, and specifically around the protection of confidential client information? I think this question is bigger than just confidential client information. Are there adequate safeguards in the attest firm to ensure that there's adequate quality control, there's adequate compliance with the AICPA code, and that there's adequate compliance with generally accepted auditing standards and appropriate compliance with attest standards and financial reporting standards? So I think this is, while confidential client information is important here, I think the answer to this question really has to be in a larger framework, that we want to ensure that there are adequate quality control to ensure compliance with all professional standards.
So if I'm understanding where we are now, we started with, yes, the leasing entity should be regulated because they're providing the personnel who are actually doing the assurance work for another entity as leased employees. And what I'm hearing now is we've kind of circled around again and said, well, okay, wait a minute though. we just include those folks that are being leased in part of the peer review. And so maybe we don't need to regulate the tax/consulting entity that's leasing all the employees. And I hear the concern where Oregon, keep Oregon weird. We would be an outlier. And I understand that. But as we're going through this, I'm hearing a little bit of Mark Hugh in my head that I mentioned earlier, saying, yeah, we're looking at yeah, we're wondering about public protection.
I think we're trying to wrap our heads around two things. One, regulation of the attest side and the attest firm in substance rather than form. And then in Oregon, because we regulate tax differently than other states regulate tax, we have a concern about continuing our practice of regulating firms that offer tax services to the public the way we always have. And so we're using our authority and oversight in the tax function to say the tax firm is more like the attest firm, but the non-attest things that happen be outside of attest and tax, I think is a different animal altogether, if that makes sense.
This is Sherry. I have a layperson question for you, and I just want to make sure the clarification is out there for our meeting today. So when you say, and it connects with me on something you said earlier today. So we say that Oregon does it differently. It's because of our income tax.
It's because of our rules that if you're going to sign a tax return as a tax preparer, you're either a CPA or you're a licensed tax preparer. If you want to sign a business tax return, you have to be a CPA, I think, in the state of Oregon.
Yeah, I was just
so
trying to decide whether I was connecting that to income tax or just broadly.
So let me clarify one thing, and this is coming from Martin, a conversation that, or a comment that you made months ago. I think there's a hole in Oregon rules where if Jason is preparing an individual income tax return, I am subject to the jurisdiction of the Oregon Board of Practitioners. Ignore the fact that I'm a CPA. I'm not a CPA anymore.
Right.
Okay. If I'm preparing a partnership return, there's nobody that governs me from a state standpoint. I can go hang a shingle and just do business returns. Is my understanding correct, Martin?
I think so. I think what I just heard you say is simply point out that on the business side of the equation for tax returns for businesses, we don't have quite that same level of consistency in terms of requiring regulatory oversight by the state, as we do in the area of compensated provision of services for individual tax returns. However, I want to state for the record, since this is a public meeting and in the public domain, I do not know for the record whether that inconsistency was an intended or an unintended policy outcome from the legislature, right? Because as you've heard me say this in different contexts 1,000 times by now, public policy is the law of unintended consequences. And I don't know whether that was actually intentional on the legislature's behalf, but intent or not, you're absolutely right, Jason. It is not consistent.
Thank you. So I knew this was going to be a challenge as I worked through the agenda and all the materials. And my only solace is that I'm surrounded by super scary smart people. And we're not the only ones dealing with this. So we've drifted. Don't want to say we've drifted. We started with Ray's first bullet point, and that is what do we do here? Because there's outside influence. And really the big issue to me is there's outside influence. We recognize that influence is going to take different forms. What do we do with it? What do we do about it? We're concerned. That's obvious based on the discussion. What do we do? What do we recommend to the board that they do? And I'm not asking for a wonderful 3-line summary statement here that solves all problems, but I'm just restating kind of that's what I think we're grappling with. If you have other things you think we're grappling with, add them on the pile, please.
Well, let me see if go ahead, Amanda, and then.
Well, I was gonna say, so my comment on the second bullet, which I know we've been focusing largely on staff and staff concerns and internal quality, right? But when we come to the second bullet, which is also who should be allowed to be a client of this attest firm, I think that there's a related conflict of interest, right? Because what I'm seeing is, they're talking about whether or not other firms held within by that PE entity should be allowed. Should they be allowed to be an attest client or not? I would almost take that a step further and say, when you look at those holdings, what about their direct competitors? Because if you're looking at, if my company's being audited and my auditors are being paid by the owner of my direct competitor, there's a conflict of interest there, right? And the PE may have an incentive to have a competitor look better or worse, depending on how, what their plans are. And so I think that there's at least a failure of independence and appearance there. And so is that something that should kind of, when we're looking at how to regulate which angles and things, I mean, there's a factor there as well.
Amanda, to me, that's very interesting. I've not gone there in my head yet, but okay. So the group that I own is auditing the group that Ray owns, and Ray and I are kind of not seeing eye to eye right now. So maybe I encourage my auditors to be a little extra harsh.
Yeah, I think it's the first time that Amanda made me cry in a public meeting because she's so right.
I think this is the challenge of trying to ensure that audits are sufficiently independent. The independence, integrity, and objectivity of auditors is central to the audit function. And irrespective, this is why we don't want the PE investors influencing compensation or quality controls in the audit process. And there need to be adequate safeguards to ensure that the quality controls in the attest function. I'm finding it hard to use the word attest firm because I think that may be more in name only but there should be adequate controls over the attest function to ensure that those people operating in the attest world are independent and they act with integrity and objectivity. I guess what I'm hearing in general is we're more concerned about the underlying attest function than an attest firm in name only. And we want to ensure that the attest function is sufficiently independent that peer review is able to look at the attest function and ensure that there's adequate quality control, that there's an adequate tone at the top, that there's adequate quality controls to ensure that audit work are done with sufficient integrity and quality as they were back in the day when a test firm meant a test firm that had employees. So I think that's, as I work on a redraft of this that would potentially, I'm trying to think of next steps, and I've got to sit back and redraft this based on the input I've heard today. Once I redraft that, should I send it to Martin, have Martin send it to the committee, and I can take input such that I can give a rough draft to the board for the board meeting on January 29th.
So, Ray, for the record, I think Angie would want me to say that while I can distribute materials to the LRC, if we're talking about an input feedback, that is something we have to do in the public domain. So the process that you're describing, the first part can work in terms of you drafting a revised thing and us getting that out to the committee. But any input or discussion of it, we're going to have to do in a public meeting. So there's really two versions of this. Either we skip the public meeting part and we simply say, here's the revised draft, right? And essentially we wait until we have an LRC meeting before or after the board meeting to discuss it, or you take that revised draft and saying, this is a draft that the LRC hasn't seen. It's simply informed by the discussion that we had at the LRC, right, in the public domain. But it's not an LRC product. It's not LRC recommended. It's not LRC discussed. It's simply Ray's summary of what you heard at this meeting, and we can bring that to the board meeting, right? Those are really the only two options that I see under kind of legal options for us to kind of deal with next steps.
That's fair, Martin.
And can put individual comments. Like
you mean everybody can send me back individual comments that that we could then bring to the board individually, which would be a little messy, yeah. But I can then assemble individual comments and bring that to your revised draft. I could assemble those and bring that to the board, right? If we want to avoid having a public meeting before the board meeting.
They have to be comments. You can't just say, it couldn't appear like you were voting on what Ray said. Yeah, I agree. I think that could become problematic.
Right. I hear what you're saying.
So,
but
Mr.
clearly
Chair,
I'm going to have to take the comments here and develop a more comprehensive response.
So, Mr. Chair, what do you, given those options, what would you prefer as the fearless leader of this group?
So the two options are do it with comments back and forth and give the board a little bit of a hodgepodge.
Essentially, yes, because if the only way that we can have as a group an input discussion is in a public meeting, right? There's nothing that stops Ray from drafting a revised version. The issue is discussing the revised version. And for that, there are only two options. One is to simply have people react individually, but not to the group, but just to me. And then I give these individual reactions as a list back to the board. Or we schedule an LRC meeting, even if it's just over lunchtime, and say, hey, we're doing an abbreviated LRC over lunch to go over Ray's draft and revised draft and see what further edits we may make so that we can get to a place where we can have a formal LRC endorsed in a public meeting, discussed, voted out product saying, here's what LRC's recommendation is for the board in terms of responses to the white paper.
To me, it's one more meeting. If we could do it in an hour, that the second option, Ray revises his notes. We have a chance to look at that. We, even if it's a Zoom only meeting, we do that for maybe an hour and limit it to an hour. That to me serves our board better than the hodgepodge, because the board has got potentially some other things going on now with a suggestion that Mr. Pidioni made to them for that board meeting. And so I think having something more direct from this committee would be more beneficial. How do others feel who are impacted by that decision and being in another meeting?
I think it may be more of a time savings doing it that way.
Okay. Net.
I'm happy with another meeting.
Okay. Amanda, Melissa, you just enjoy being around us so much that so we
What do
need-
our calendars look like?
Yeah, we need another meeting prior to Monday, the 29th.
That's the bad part right there.
So if I may be selfish, both Haley and I are at a NASPA board meeting the week prior to the Oregon board meeting, which is very tightly timed around the rules work that you're also potentially painfully familiar with. And as such, my selfish part says, in order to give Ray a little bit of time, because this stuff is pretty heavy lift, can we look at the very early parts of the last week of January? Like Monday or Tuesday that week before the Thursday board meeting? Does that look
Monday or Tuesday, I'm in an ERB meeting.
Oh, you are. Okay.
Yeah,
We
I'm in New Orleans those 2 days.
Okay. How about since a little offline on the 22nd and the 23rd, the 19th is technically a holiday. Let's see here.
notice he said technically. Just teasing, Martin.
I mean, as long as DAS EIS is kind to me, I don't mind working on the 19th. I will be already relocated at that point.
It's
How about
tight.
the 6th? How about a week from today? If I worked on things over the weekend and we had something a week from today, the 16th.
That seems like a monumental ask of you, Ray, but if you're putting it on the table, I know for me the 16th works great.
Look, I'm on a flight, so, but
Oh.
from a technical standpoint, I mean, I probably bring the least technical knowledge in the
Are
room.
you gonna flight
so,
all day?
No, so, well, maybe, just let me.
The
Maybe that's-
16th, I have a window from about 9 to 11. That's it.
Okay, yeah.
So that is lunchtime somewhere, but
What's the 20th look like?
20th, I'm good except around the lunch hour.
20th, I'm good until 1.
So 20th in the morning.
Could we do like, I hate to say it this way, but could we do like 8 o'clock?
Doesn't bother me.
8 a.m.
8 a.m. it is for me.
I could do 8 to 9.
8 to 9.
We're kind of outside of when a lot of meetings start really pushing it.
Ms. Amanda?
On the 20th, I'm not available before 9:30.
Okay.
And Melissa, that doesn't work for you because you're not available after 9.
I could be available at 8 on, well, no, on I guess the 22nd. Sorry.
What day, Amanda?
The 22nd.
22nd, I am available after about 10.
I'm gonna drop myself out of that because I have a board of directors meeting half day that day, and I'm not. I mean, I have concerns around all of this, but I can't speak from the technical aspect of
Yeah, and
nuance in a firm.
getting into the 22nd and 23rd, I'm sitting there at the NASBA board meeting, so
So let's go back to the 20th for just a second. I'm going to make a proposal. Most of the people are not here, so they can't throw things at me. I don't mind a meeting that starts before 8, but I don't know how that works for Martin, you and your group.
for me, it's fine because I will be on East Coast time that day. So I will already be adjusted. It's really more a question of now that Shelley has had her first slightly traumatizing exposure to hosting a LRC meeting, which was, I just want to say for the record, not her fault, but a back-end IT problem, not of the board's making, that hopefully will not recur. And I know you're a little bit of a morning person. Are you willing to potentially host us early? So for you, it's actually better.
Shelley's muted.
Shelley, you're muted.
Andrew? Hello?
He's asking, he probably couldn't hear you.
All I said was you were muted.
Andrew, what you missed was Shelley confirming with Martin that she was fine with an 8 a.m. Eastern time start.
I can flex my schedule, not a problem.
Yeah,
I'll be off camera for that, but I'll be there.
time. Just my hard stop is going to be 8 a.m. because that class is already made up and I can't miss it again, or else I
Well, we can we can ask Andrew to co-host, and if we go beyond 8 a.m.
So if we start earlier than 7 or earlier than 8, does that work on the 20th?
I would also have a hard stop at 8 o'clock that morning, but I could do before 8. Yeah.
Okay. Melissa?
I believe so. I'm just yes, I could definitely do that. My hard stop is 9 a.m.
Ray?
I can, if we did 7 or 7:30, I'm good.
7 o'clock, Tuesday, the 20th?
Virtual?
Virtual. And then Ray, does that give you the time that you need to modify your comments and thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely it does. Let me ask a couple questions of the group. As you looked at my responses to part 2 and part 3. So let's jump down to part 2 for a moment. Do you have input for me on kind of the whole issues surrounding disclosure and public understanding? And I think we've explored the public understanding issues even more here because we're learning a lot today that we didn't know about the attest firm. And if we don't know it, there's a whole lot of folks out there that probably really don't understand when somebody signs a test report, who's really signing the test report, because who's behind it is, from our conversation today, a big question mark.
So skip right now, just to confirm what we've got. Tuesday, January
The
20th,
20th.
7 a.m. We're coming off a holiday for some folks, but 7 a.m. all Zoom through the technology of the Board of Accountancy. Hard stop by 8 a.m. Pacific. And then does that work for you? Let's see, you're still on this side of the country, right, Martin? Or are you back east?
I will be back east, but that for me is perfect timing because that's a day that I set aside for essentially working from there.
Okay.
So I'm very good. I have scheduled meetings not until 10 a.m. Pacific
Okay.
that day.
Comfortable? All right. So with that said, Angie, I didn't ask Angie. I want to make sure legal counsel's here. She hasn't glared at me with the "you want me here at a 7 a.m."
I can do that.
Okay, I can do that. Yes,
Carefully phrased as not I want to do that, but she said I can do
can
that.
do that. Yes. I have a business partner who would give me the exact same response. So I understand. Okay. With that scheduled, that takes us through the NASBA document. Item 5C is the AICPA peak items that the board, if it chooses to comment, which I think have they intimated that they would like to?
The board itself has not met since this document emerged into the public sphere, because the document emerged in the public sphere, I believe, right around the start of the new year. It was essentially voted to be exposed, I think, on the 19th of December, Friday before Christmas. But the actual text, the publication came out about roughly a week later. And so the board has not indicated anything on this yet, but I have had a conversation with the board chair and quite frankly, some of my colleagues, and I think there is very, very strong interest in having boards comment. And I want to just point out for the record that AICPA, in its last public discussion of this document, which occurred over 2 days on the 18th and the 19th of December, really was very responsive to changing the process around this document, because they originally started out with a much smaller version of this document in a very short exposure period, went into that meeting with a longer exposure period of, I think 90 days was their proposal. And then at the request of a regulator at the meeting unanimously allowed for a 120-day exposure period, which specifically means and was intended to allow boards that either met just before tax season or just after tax season to have an opportunity to look at this document and respond. Now, that said, for those of you that have read this document, it's a really heavy lift. It's 50 pages worth of really, really in the weeds, very broad, very dense material with, I think, over 40 very specific questions that are being asked to comment on. So it is a significant lift to really work our way through that. I do think that that's actually really good news and a sign of a healthy discussion, but it means it's going to be quite a lift for regulatory boards. Short answer is, I would be very surprised if the board didn't want to engage in that opportunity.
Martin, if I can add, I've been through it. Martin understates it when he says this material is dense. I spent I've spent a number of hours reading it. In the process, I thought, how would I teach this if I had to teach this to somebody else? And I'm still struggling with the answer to that. Martin, I was happy to see that you were reached out to the AICPA to try and pull in. They've got a meeting that's concurrent with the board meeting that they're going to try and explain it, which I think would be to everybody's edification, because this is it's deep in the weeds, and it's probably clear that a lot of us just don't understand enough. So I'm looking forward to their explanation of this on the 29th.
Hey, Ray, if I may interrupt you
Yeah.
for just a quick second, just while you're on that, I want to make that a little bit more specific. So it's a webinar that AICPA has opened up for Pacific time, 1 p.m. on January 29th. I think it's about an hour and a half long. And it's specifically intended to walk through that exposure draft. Because they're not constrained the way we are in a comment period. It allows, I think, for some ability to discuss back and forth. I don't know how much of that will happen, but it's valuable enough that I had immediate conversations with our board chair about possibly structuring our own board meeting around it, so that the board could potentially, as a whole, listen in, which doesn't mean that it would substitute for if there is an LRC member that wants to, register for that webinar. I'm happy if you didn't get that invite, happy to forward it to anyone or to the committee, because I do think it's valuable to get as much data on this piece as we can, because it's so difficult to ascertain. So thank you, Ray, for reminding us about that. And sorry to interrupt you with, I just wanted to throw out that specific timing for folks.
I think, Martin, to send that invite to the members of the LRC. I know I didn't get it, but I would be signing up for it, because I think and I think the comment, we'll have another board meeting in April just prior to submitting comments. So this isn't as time urgent, but we're going to have things ready for the April board meeting in terms of coming out of the LRC.
So what I'm hearing perhaps is we have 19 minutes left in this meeting. I think we might be able to talk through the first paragraph, if it's easy, of this document. And we may all be well benefited by listening to that webcast on the 29th. So what I would like to suggest is that we put this on hold. Martin, you tell me if you disagree, until we have that opportunity to hear from the AICPA and have the board hear that webcast, and then give us additional direction, so we're headed the way the board wants us to go. Is that reasonable, Martin?
It is, and very reasonable. And I'm actually looking on our calendar. I want to actually pivot to, I think, if I remember correctly, and Andrew, if you're still with me here, and Shelley, please double check me.
Yep.
I think we set an LRC already for April 28th. I don't know whether we set a specific time on the 28th. I don't think we've sent out the invites yet, because I don't see it on my calendar yet, but I think I saw it on the board calendar that we had an April 28th LRC.
11 to 2.
I'm sorry?
11 to 2.
11 to 2. Thank you.
I will, yeah, that's right, during leadership conference for OSCPA. That's the Tuesday full day, Jason.
Okay. The,
That's a long-standing pre-scheduled meeting, so.
Yeah.
Event, sorry.
we do have that scheduled that day, and I think when we put it on, you made that same comment that,
Yeah.
okay, but
I've had a contract
yeah,
in place for a long time.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we worked through that timing issue, I think at a prior LRC, because I don't think the day at 28th was picked out of thin air.
I think we did work through that with thought.
So what I was simply trying to say is that if we stick to the 28th, right, we have, even though it's a little bit tough timing, right, because the comment deadline is the 30th, right, we could at the LRC level make that part of our existing meeting rather than schedule yet another one on the 28th. It does mean that I would have to negotiate with our board chair that we do a lunchtime board meeting around on either the 29th or 30th of April so that we can get the comments in on time.
Megan and I will not be in attendance on the 29th either because we conclude at noon.
Okay. What about the 30th?
30th is open.
Okay. And we have a BOAC that day, so it'll be a little bit of an interesting one
It's the day of the.
for us to navigate. Yeah, that's the day that comments are due. Yes.
Okay, so we're Tuesday, the 28th of April, LRC 11 to 2. Given that, can we still hold it here, Sherry? Because a bunch of your team's going to be at the leadership conference.
Martin, do you know when your board meeting is in April for NASBA?
In April. Oh, no, you're scaring me. Hang on.
It's probably a Thursday, Friday, so it may be 23, 24.
Yeah. Hang on.
Then we could hold it in my office. In the conference room.
Hang on. Hang on.
To rehash something for where we were before too. I was curious if that week prior was a problem. I just can't remember. That would be the week of the 20th.
Week of the 20th of April. 20th, I'm unavailable. Okay.
I'm
Andrew,
unavailable that week as well.
well, Martin's looking for that. Andrew, if we move that from the OSCPA Center to my office, I don't have the level of cool technology there that the OSCPA does, but could you run the meeting from my office?
Yeah, not a problem. We can host it.
Okay.
You can be an attendee, or we can host it from your office, and then we can just be admin hosts on that also.
Okay, whatever you'd like to do. It's closer for you, Angie.
No, I think in the past, we've avoided doing stuff from firm offices, but that's totally up to you guys to decide.
Oh, that's right, because
Perception. Okay, I just
People do it, other boards do it.
just
I mean,
throwing the option
I-
out.
I was gonna say, we can always run things, but that week of, the 27th, 28th and 29th, we have significant staff out because we're, away.
Yeah.
So I was just checking again. So
Uh,
can you find it?
so Ray, you're right. It's the April 23rd and 24th where I'm offline.
Okay.
Okay.
What about the 21st?
Sorry,
What about April 21st for LRC?
I'm good with that.
Amanda, Melissa?
I'm out of town that entire week.
That week, Amanda?
The
Okay.
entire week.
That might have been what?
Good for you. Hopefully not at a conference somewhere. Or if it's at a conference, is a conference between, your toes and sand on a beach or something like that.
That's the plan. Got a date with the dive boat.
Nobody's gonna want the week before because of tax season, the days after tax season.
You don't want, no,
Yeah.
that would be.
Yeah.
That would be, we can do that, but.
No, not.
So we're still coming back to the 28th.
Okay,
So 28th, 11 to 2. We'll decide where we're going to host it. Angie, if you'll just think about whether or not to host at my office, let that roll around your head and
That's totally up to you guys. I'm just saying that's what I'm just saying that's what they've done in the past. So that's
Okay.
totally up to you guys.
recommended not to. Let me check to see how many are gonna be here, but I think seriously, we only have maybe 2 staff in the office.
yeah, and that's tough.
Yeah.
Or, Sherry's, let's go here. So the 28th, Sherry's not going to be here anyway.
Yeah.
I could either be in Salem or I can be online. And it could be run from the board's office in Salem, could it not?
Yeah.
You're going to be there anyway.
Yep.
Angie, I don't know if you plan to be if you're going to be in Salem that day or not. But if not, you're online. Should we do that instead?
Probably better.
So
That works for me.
Okay, April 28th,
No.
11 to 2,
hosted at the
hosted at the Board of Accountancy office with hybrid Zoom option, which I'm guessing I'll likely be on Zoom. So
Okay.
okay, so
But that is not, okay, that is in addition to the one that we just set for the white paper stuff, right, on the Tuesday after MLK.
correct.
Yeah.
Tuesday, the 20th is for the white paper and raised notes. Tuesday, the 28th of April, it's Tuesday, the 20th of January. Tuesday, the 28th of April is for discussion of the AICPA exposure draft after we've listened to the webcast, the related webcast, and after we've listened to direction from the board. Comfortable? All right. All right. Any further business that we need to do today? Hearing none. Thank you for being on today. Thank you for your patience as we went through the technical challenges. I'm now adjourning this public meeting of the Laws and Rules Committee. The time is 1:52 p.m. on Friday, January 9th. Please stop the recording.
Thank you all. Thank you for your patience
Thank you
with the
very
technical
much.
difficulties
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.